My name is Rachel Mendoza, and I'm going to tell you something that changed my soul forever. I died on October 17th, 2019. I flatlined in the ICU of Ridgeway Medical Center in New Jersey after a severe allergic reaction to a medication I didn't even know I was allergic to. My heart stopped for 6 full minutes, and doctors later told my husband I was technically gone. But what they didn't know is that something was happening during those 6 minutes, something so real and vivid, I can still feel it when I close my eyes. You see, I was born and raised in a secular Jewish household. We weren't very religious, but our Jewish identity was more of a cultural foundation. Shabbat dinners, Passover, Yom Kippur. We observed the traditions, but didn't talk much about God. I had my bat mitzvah at 13, said the prayers, learned the Torah portions, but as I got older, I drifted from faith altogether. I worked as a clinical psychologist and taught part-time at a university. My life was rooted in reason, logic, and science. So when I tell you what I'm about to share, please understand, it wasn't something I would have ever believed in before. I was the kind of person who dismissed NDE stories as hallucinations caused by brain chemistry. But then I died, and everything I thought I knew shattered into dust. Because the moment my body stopped, I felt myself being pulled, lifted, out of my physical form. I hovered above the hospital bed, watching my husband scream for help, doctors rushing in, a nurse yelling for a crash cart. It should have scared me, but I wasn't afraid. I felt calm. Then suddenly, as if I blinked, everything around me vanished into light. Not a blinding light, but a warm, golden presence that made me feel more known than I'd ever felt in my entire life. It was like the light could see every part of me, even the shameful corners of my soul I had never spoken aloud. And still, it embraced me. The light grew stronger, and then it started taking shape. That's when I saw him. At first, I didn't recognize him, not because he wasn't familiar, but because I wasn't expecting to see Jesus. He stood before me, clothed in light, but not in some theatrical way. There was no crown, no dramatic robe, no booming voice. Just a man with eyes that pierced through me, not with judgment, but with a love so fierce it made me collapse to my knees. The moment I looked at him, my soul understood everything. All the arguments I'd had against Christianity, all the times I rolled my eyes at my Christian friends, it all faded. Because he was who he said he was. He didn't have to explain it. I just knew. I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out. Instead, I wept. I don't know how long I cried, time didn't exist there. Jesus bent down and lifted me up, and his touch sent a wave of something through me that felt like truth, like my soul had been starving for it. And then he spoke. Rachel, I love you. I always have. And there's something I need you to see. Without walking, we moved through space together. It was as if the scene changed around us. Suddenly, we were standing over what looked like a vast land. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then I recognized the terrain. It was Israel. I had never been there in my earthly life, but I knew my soul recognized it. Jesus looked down over it and said, "This land carries the promise of my Father, but many do not yet understand the fullness of what is coming." I watched as visions opened below us, like I was looking at a movie playing on fast forward. I saw crowds in Jerusalem. Some were praying. Others were weeping. And then I saw confusion, division, even violence, but above it all, I felt the heartbeat of something divine moving through the chaos. And Jesus said, "There is more to this land than political borders. This is the center of a spiritual awakening that has already begun." What he showed me next stunned me beyond anything I could have imagined. The scene shifted again, and this time we were looking at a group of world leaders. I recognized some of them, others I didn't. And then Jesus pointed toward one man. It was Donald Trump. I felt my chest tighten because I had strong feelings about him when I was alive, feelings shaped by the news, my profession, and even my family's political leanings. But what Jesus said wasn't about politics as we know it. He said, "Rachel, many misunderstand the vessels I choose. I don't pick based on approval. I pick based on purpose." And then I saw layers, spiritual layers, of what had happened during Trump's presidency. I saw him standing before the Western Wall, but it wasn't just a photo op. There was a ripple in the spiritual realm, something invisible to the natural eye, something eternal. Jesus continued, "I am not endorsing a man. I am revealing a moment." What happened through him was part of a greater movement, one that stirred my people, and one that must not be ignored. I watched as Jesus showed me documents, deals, conversations behind closed doors. But more than the content, I could feel the spiritual weight of it all. It was like watching the unseen threads of prophecy being woven together, not perfectly, not cleanly, but intentionally. He said, "Many will argue over the vessel. But what matters is the awakening it ignited." My knees felt weak, and I wanted to sit, but there was no ground beneath me. We were just suspended in this place of revelation, and I was barely able to absorb what I was being shown. I thought of my colleagues, my students, my secular friends. How could I explain this to them without sounding crazy? Jesus looked at me again and said, "This message is not for debate. It is for declaration." There was more. So much more. As we hovered in that space, Jesus opened up a kind of vision I can't fully explain. I didn't see with eyes, I saw with understanding. I saw Israel not just as a nation, but as a spiritual hinge. A doorway. A chosen land that carried a frequency the rest of the world couldn't hear unless they were tuned into it. I saw people from every race and background turning their faces toward it, drawn not by politics, but by something ancient calling them home. I saw a shaking, a literal shaking in the land. Earthquakes, protests, celebrations, and miracles happening side by side. And then I saw young people, Jews, Muslims, Christians, standing together in prayer. No one was yelling. No one was fighting. They were just crying out to God. And I knew this was the revival. This was what all the prophecies pointed to, but it wasn't unfolding the way we thought it would. It wasn't coming through big churches or televised sermons. It was coming through the ground, the soil, the broken. Jesus said, "What is written must come to pass, and my word will not return void." I looked at him and asked, my voice finally returning, "Why me? Why show this to me?" He smiled and said, "Because you were never meant to die. You were meant to wake up." And with that, I felt the light dimming. Not in a scary way, but like a curtain being gently drawn. I didn't want to leave, but I knew I had to. Jesus reached out, touched my forehead, and whispered something in Hebrew I didn't understand, but my soul did. I felt it burn into me. And then suddenly, I was back. My body jolted. Machines were beeping. Nurses were yelling. My husband was sobbing. And I opened my eyes, knowing everything had changed. As the days passed in the hospital after I came back, I couldn't get the visions out of my head. At first, I didn't even tell anyone what had happened, not the nurses, not my husband, not even my sister, who had flown in from Chicago to be by my side. I felt this pressure in my chest like I was carrying something too heavy for words. The doctors were baffled. They kept saying things like, "You're lucky to be alive," and "It's a miracle you didn't suffer brain damage." But I knew better. I hadn't just survived, I had been sent back for a reason. And that reason weighed on me like a divine secret. One night, when everyone else had left and the hospital room was quiet, I asked God aloud, "What am I supposed to do with this?" There was no voice, no flash of light, but something stirred inside me, like a memory that wasn't mine, or maybe a deeper part of me that had always been there, but had never spoken until now. That night, I dreamt of Jesus again. He stood at the foot of my bed, looking exactly as he had before, but this time he wasn't surrounded by heavenly light. He looked normal, ordinary, like a man who might be walking the streets of any city. But his presence was just as strong. He said, "Rachel, the world is shifting, and many of my people are asleep. What I showed you must be spoken, not just as a warning, but as an invitation." I tried to ask what he meant, but I woke up before I could speak. That morning, I asked my husband to bring me my journal. I began writing everything I could remember, every word, every image, every feeling. It poured out of me like water breaking through a dam. Pages and pages of details I hadn't even realized were still inside me. I was crying the entire time, not because I was afraid, but because I finally understood. My whole life, I'd been a spectator of faith. But now I had been handed a message from God Himself. And I knew it wasn't for me to keep. When I was discharged, I went home to our quiet suburban neighborhood in Westfield, where everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. My husband, Mark, tried to ease me back into routine. My colleagues sent flowers and emails about postponing classes until I was fully recovered. My patients left voicemails with kind messages and well wishes. But I couldn't return to any of it, not yet. I would sit in my living room for hours, staring at the wall, playing the entire experience in my head like a film on repeat. I couldn't escape the vision of Israel, the sound of Jesus' voice, the image of Trump standing near the Western Wall as spiritual forces moved around him like wind. I didn't care about his policies or public image anymore. That wasn't the point. Jesus had shown me that this man, flawed, brash, and unconventional, had been used in a divine ripple, a fulfillment of prophecy, a shaking of foundations. And I knew people wouldn't want to hear that. My entire professional circle leaned far from anything involving faith, let alone politics. But this wasn't about defending a politician. It was about understanding the deeper currents beneath the surface. So I began to pray. For the first time in my life, I got on my knees in my bedroom and cried out, not in Hebrew, not in rote memory, but in raw, trembling words. "God, tell me what to do." And this warmth filled the room. Not physically, but inside me. Like a fire in my ribcage that wouldn't go out. I knew what I had to do. I had to speak. I had to tell people, no matter how crazy it sounded. Because it wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a dream. I had died and I had met Jesus. And He had given me a warning for the world. I started small. I spoke to my sister Leah first. She had always been more spiritual than I was. She even dabbled in meditation and read books about consciousness and soul journeys. When I told her what had happened, her eyes filled with tears before I even finished. "I believe you," she whispered. I don't know why, but I do. That gave me courage to tell my parents. They were harder. My father, a staunch agnostic, sat silently as I spoke, arms crossed, face unreadable. When I finished, he sighed and said, "I'm glad you're alive. But I hope you're not throwing your career away for this." That hurt. But I realized then that not everyone would understand, and that was okay. Jesus didn't say convince. He said declare. So I declared. I opened up to my community, to my students, to anyone who would listen. And the reactions were mixed. Some were stunned into silence. Some rolled their eyes. Some unfollowed me on social media or ghosted my calls. But others leaned in. There were people who had never believed in God, who told me my story cracked something open in them. There were Christians who wept as they listened, saying, "You saw what we've been praying for." I even heard from Messianic Jews, people who had been waiting for someone like me to confirm what they already felt stirring in the spirit. And the more I shared, the clearer it all became. I wasn't meant to preach. I wasn't meant to argue. I was just meant to testify. And in that simple obedience, I began to see miracles, little ones at first, like strangers messaging me with dreams that matched what I had seen. Then bigger ones. A woman from Tel Aviv wrote me saying she had been standing at the Wailing Wall the exact day I flatlined, and she felt a divine tremor in her spirit that she couldn't explain until she heard my story. These weren't coincidences. They were confirmations. But there's something else I haven't mentioned yet, something that haunts me still. After Jesus showed me the vision of Israel and spoke about Trump's spiritual role, he looked at me with an intensity one can't describe and said, "Tell them the shaking has only just begun." And then he showed me something darker. A storm. Not a physical one, but a global one. It moved like a shadow across nations, confusion, war, betrayal, disinformation. I saw world leaders making deals behind closed doors, selling their countries for power. I saw false prophets, not just in churches, but on screens, talking heads, influencers, political figures, spinning lies that looked like truth. And in the middle of all of it, I saw the people of Israel, caught between forces they didn't yet understand. But then there was a sound. A trumpet. A real one. It blasted from the heavens like a call to arms. And people began to wake up. Slowly at first, but then in waves. I saw entire families falling to their knees. I saw people burning idols, money, fame, politics, even religion. I saw them crying out for truth, not tradition, not comfort, but raw, unfiltered, holy truth. And Jesus said, "This is the beginning of the return. My remnant is rising." I begged him for more clarity, but he only said, "They must choose. You must speak, and I will do the rest." That's the part that keeps me up some nights. Because I know that storm is coming. Some of it is already here. And while I don't know every detail, I know this. The only refuge will be in him. Not in policies. Not in parties. Not in headlines. But in the one who died and rose again, and who's coming back, not as a lamb, but as a lion. In the months that followed, I couldn't ignore how much had changed in me. It wasn't just about what I had seen, it was how I now saw everything. The world looked different. News cycles felt hollow. Conversations seemed shallow. I could see beneath things, feel the spiritual threads weaving through every moment, every choice, every soul. I began waking up at 3 a.m. most nights, heart racing, mind full of images, Israel bathed in golden light, voices crying out in different languages, and always that same message ringing in my spirit: the shaking has only just begun. I tried to return to work. I really did. I walked into my university office and sat at my desk, staring at the framed degrees on the wall and the untouched lesson plans in my drawer. I felt like a stranger in my own life. When I tried to teach again, the words felt empty, scripted, forced. I would look out at my students, all of them with glowing laptop screens and distracted eyes, and wonder how many of them knew what time it really was, not class time, but prophetic time. I finally left my job. My colleagues didn't understand. Some thought I was going through PTSD or some spiritual breakdown. But I wasn't breaking, I was waking. And when you've seen Jesus, when you've heard him speak about the destiny of a nation, you can't go back to small talk and safe careers. I spent more and more time alone, praying, journaling, fasting. The more I obeyed, the more he revealed. I began to see signs even in daily life, conversations with strangers, things I'd read in scripture, even dreams I didn't ask for. It all pointed in one direction: time is short, and Israel stands at the center of something eternal. It wasn't long before I started traveling. I felt this stirring to physically go to Israel. I had never been. In fact, I used to roll my eyes at people who took those religious pilgrimages, spiritual tourism, I called it. But now I knew I needed to stand where I had spiritually stood in the vision. So I bought a ticket. I didn't tell many people. I just packed my things and flew into Ben Gurion Airport with a backpack, a Bible, and a journal that was already overflowing. From the moment my feet touched the ground, I felt it again, that same frequency. It was like the land was alive, like it could feel my presence, and I could feel its heart beating beneath the stones. I visited Jerusalem first, of course. I walked the narrow streets, watched pilgrims press their foreheads against the Wailing Wall, heard the Muslim call to prayer echo across the old city, while Christian hymns drifted from nearby churches. It was jarring and beautiful and heavy all at once. I kept seeing things, symbols, flashes, confirmations. At one point, as I stood near the Mount of Olives, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned, expecting to see a local guide, but there was no one there. And yet I knew he was with me. Jesus. Not in form, but in spirit. I could feel him walking beside me, not saying anything, just being there. And then I heard it, this internal whisper that wasn't my own thought. My return will split this mountain. My feet will touch this soil again. I wept like a child. I fell to my knees right there, overwhelmed by the weight of it. Because it wasn't metaphorical. It wasn't poetic. It was literal. He's coming back here. And this land knows it. The soil remembers him. The rocks long for him. And I realized then, more than ever before, this wasn't just a nation. It was a living prophecy. After that trip, everything accelerated. I started receiving emails and messages from people all over the world who had heard my testimony. Some were skeptical, some were curious, but many were desperate for answers, for clarity, for hope. I prayed over each message, asking God to help me respond not with my opinion, but with his heart. I even heard from a young pastor in Nigeria who told me that the vision I described about people from all nations turning toward Israel matched a dream he'd had just weeks before. Another woman in Brazil said she saw Jesus in a vision holding a scroll that had Trump's name on it, and she didn't understand why until she found my story online. These were people from different cultures, denominations, and even religions, but all of them were being awakened at the same time. I realized then that what I had experienced was just one drop in a global outpouring. Jesus wasn't just revealing himself to me, he was appearing to people across the world, drawing them back to himself through dreams, near-death experiences, miracles, and even suffering. And the common thread in all of it? Israel. The land. The people. The prophecy. And yes, Donald Trump. As strange as it sounds, his role was like a spiritual fault line, something that cracked open long-hidden truths and forced people to reckon with what was really happening beneath the surface. I didn't care whether people liked him or not. That wasn't the point. The point was, God used him. And God was still using unlikely people in unlikely places to fulfill a plan that had been written long before we were born. Every time I doubted myself, every time I feared backlash or criticism, I remembered the look in Jesus' eyes when he said, "They must choose." That wasn't just about salvation. That was about obedience. That was about surrender. But here's the part that's hardest to say, because I wish the story ended there, neatly wrapped in spiritual revelation and personal transformation. But it didn't. In fact, things got harder. I began to experience intense spiritual warfare. At night, I'd feel a heaviness in the room that wasn't natural. I'd wake up with bruises I couldn't explain. Electronics would malfunction around me, my laptop, my phone, even my car. At first, I thought I was imagining it, until it started happening in front of other people. Once, while I was speaking at a small home gathering, the lights went out the moment I began talking about the vision of the shaking. Not just in the house, but on the entire block. Another time, a woman who had come to mock me, someone who had written hateful comments on my social media, stood up during my talk and suddenly collapsed to the ground, convulsing. We prayed over her, and she came back sobbing, saying she had seen a shadow leave her body. I don't share these things to scare anyone. I share them because they're real. When God reveals something, darkness tries to silence it. But I wasn't afraid, not really. I knew who was with me. I knew the light I had seen was greater than anything that could come against me. Still, it was exhausting. I cried out to God more than once, asking, "Why me? Why did you show me this?" And the answer was always the same, quiet but steady, because you were willing. Not because I was worthy. Not because I was brave. Just because I said yes. And in that yes, He gave me strength. He gave me peace. And He gave me a voice, not just to speak truth, but to wake others up before it's too late. There came a night, not long after returning from Israel, when everything seemed to come full circle. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling that same heaviness in my chest I'd felt the night I died. It wasn't fear, it was urgency. A spiritual weight that pressed against my soul and wouldn't let me sleep. I got up, walked barefoot into the living room, and lit a candle. I didn't know what I was doing, I just needed to do something. I opened my Bible randomly, flipping through the pages without a plan. It landed on Isaiah 62. For Zion's sake I will not keep silent, and for Jerusalem's sake I will not remain quiet. I felt those words sear into my spirit like fire. I couldn't keep silent. Not anymore. Not about what I'd seen. Not about what was coming. Not about what Jesus had shown me. And as I sat there, candle flickering beside me, I felt the presence of God fill the room so thick it was like the air shifted. And then I saw something not with my eyes, but in my spirit. It was like a flash of the future, a glimpse of what was still ahead. I saw America, but it wasn't the America I knew. There was chaos, division, cities in flames. But in the middle of the unrest, I saw groups of people in homes, not churches, just homes, worshiping, praying, crying out for truth. And over them I saw a light, a divine covering. Then I saw Israel again. But this time, it was weeping. Not in defeat, but in labor. Like something new was about to be born. And then Trump again. Standing before a crowd, holding something in his hand I couldn't quite make out. But I knew it was important. Not because of him, but because of the timing. And Jesus whispered in my spirit, "The time is short. The trumpet will sound sooner than they think." The days that followed were a blur. I began writing everything down, not just in my journal, but in documents, letters, recordings, anything I could use to preserve what I had seen and felt. I knew not everyone would believe me. In fact, many didn't. But that wasn't the point. Jesus didn't ask me to convince the world. He asked me to warn it. And that became my mission. I began traveling, speaking in living rooms, community centers, wherever I was invited. I wasn't a preacher. I wasn't a theologian. I was just a woman who had died, met Jesus, and come back with a message. And the more I spoke, the more others began to come forward with their own visions, their own encounters. It was like a wildfire of revelation was sweeping across the world, and we were all just trying to keep up. I spoke to a pastor in India who had a vision of Trump handing a torch to a man dressed in white. I heard from a Jewish convert in Ukraine who saw angels walking through Jerusalem with scrolls in their hands. These weren't hallucinations. They were part of something bigger, something cosmic. And in the center of it all, Jesus. Always Jesus. Not religion. Not doctrine. Just Him. Glorious. Loving. Powerful beyond comprehension. And every time I stood before people to speak, I could feel His presence beside me. Like He was standing just behind my shoulder, urging me on, reminding me of every word He had spoken in that realm beyond death. Sometimes I would pause mid-sentence, and people would say afterward that they felt something in the room shift, that they saw light flicker, or felt heat on their skin, or heard a whisper in their heart they couldn't explain. That wasn't me. That was Him. That's always Him. But it hasn't all been glory and miracles. The warfare has continued. The more I speak, the more the enemy tries to silence me. I've had threats, people emailing me, calling me delusional, dangerous, even a traitor. Some accuse me of being political, as if I care about red or blue anymore. They don't understand. This isn't about parties. This is about prophecy, about souls, about eternity. I've lost friends. Even some in my own extended family won't speak to me now. They think I've gone too far, lost my grip, turned into a religious fanatic. But I haven't. I'm finally sane. For the first time in my life, I see. And what I see is this: time is collapsing. Events are speeding up. The spiritual realm is not distant. It's overlapping with our world more and more every day. What I saw in that vision, the shaking, the awakening, the role of Trump in stirring the hearts of Israel's allies, it's not future tense anymore. It's happening. Right now. And the clock is ticking. I believe we're living in the final stretch before something cataclysmic breaks open. I don't pretend to know the date or the hour. But I know the season. And the season is now. I keep hearing that same sentence from Jesus in my dreams. Do not delay. Do not delay. And I think that's not just for me. I think it's for anyone listening, anyone reading, anyone watching. We don't have the luxury of sleepwalking anymore. The trumpet is about to sound, and when it does, it will split this world in two, those who are ready and those who aren't. I want to leave you with this. I wasn't a believer when I died. I was a secular, rational, skeptical Jewish woman who thought religion was a crutch for the weak. I mocked Christianity. I laughed at the idea of Jesus being the Messiah. But then I met him. And I tell you with everything in me, he is real. He is alive. He is the Messiah. And he is returning soon. I saw it. I felt it. And I know it in my bones. You don't have to take my word for it. Ask him yourself. Cry out to him. Even if you don't believe, even if you're angry or broken or full of doubt, he will answer. He loves you more than you can understand. And he's not coming back as a quiet teacher. He's coming back as king, as judge, as Lord of all. And he's giving us time right now, not much, but enough to turn to him before it's too late. That's why I'm sharing this. Not for clicks, not for fame, but because I have to. Because I saw what's coming. And I can't stay silent. So I beg you, ask him into your heart. Seek him while he may be found. Because once the trumpet sounds, the window closes. And I don't want you on the outside, wondering why you didn't listen when there was still time. This isn't about religion. It's about truth. It's about eternity. And Jesus, Yeshua, is the only way. If this testimony spoke to something in your heart, don't scroll away. Take a moment. Ask Jesus into your life. Say his name. Cry out to him. He's waiting. And if you felt something stir inside you during this story, share this video. Someone else out there might be waiting to hear the truth. Don't let fear or doubt stop you. Click like, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. We're sharing more testimonies like this from people around the world who have seen the other side and come back with a message of hope. You're not here by accident. God is calling. Will you answer?